welcome everyone to the very first episode of the Smith Law Firm podcast. We are starting off with a segment called Estate Planning Nightmares, where we're going to go through a bunch of different celebrity estate planning stories and relate them to everyday people just to make estate planning kind of a breeze. So my name is Courtney. I work at the Smith Law Firm along with Sean Smith. Say hi to the people.
Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Sean, good to see you.
So together we are going to start off this segment by talking about Michael Jackson, King of Pop. So Sean, do you have any fun stories or memories that you have with Michael Jackson?
Yeah, I remember Michael, he was one of my favorite recording artists. And I know when he first got really popular was his Thriller album. But I tell people all the time, I don't think that was some of Michael's best work. I think the album, the Off the Wall album, to me, was one of the best Michael Jackson albums of all time. And then, of course, he came through with Thriller, and then they had the cinematography, like the videos, Thriller, and all that was huge, and he really went worldwide at that point. But I really liked the Off the Wall album. That was one of my favorites as a kid growing up.
You don't really hear a lot of the off the wall. Mainly everybody talks about Thriller. Like Thriller's still on the charts today.
Yeah, but let me tell you, Off the Wall, he was more raw. It was really just pure Michael. It was before he did a lot of those transformations, not just the physical transformations, but just the commercial transformations of his music. To me, it was just raw Michael. And it was just, have you listened to the Off the Wall album before, just out of curiosity?
No, I went straight from Jackson 5 to Thriller. I skipped that whole
Yeah.
the whole segment.
Well, if you get a chance, listen to Off the Wall. It's a good album. But Mike had some problems, as we know, when he passed away. So let's get into that a little bit.
A lot of problems. It's still going on today. A lot of estate issues that he has. And you wouldn't think that, the King of Pop with his title and everything that came with that, he would have like estate planning issues. This was a shock to me pulling this story up. Do you want to start off by talking about some key aspects from his estate
Yeah,
plan?
yeah, let's do that. Um, I hear that all the time. People talk about, well, how could Michael have estate planning problems? He's a multimillionaire or even a billionaire or whatever. But let me tell you, I meet people with lots of money all the time who fail to properly put a plan in place. I think just recently, was it a few years ago when Prince passed away, and I don't think he had a will even. And I know he had a lot of problems with the estate plan and people challenging it. But that's a podcast for another day. But let's get into some of Michael's issues. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney, that his estate was almost $1 billion at the time he passed away, and that was what, 25 years ago, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think at the time, at least when his estate first opened up, there were some problems with his will and who was named as executor. I think he initially named three people, one of which was his sister Janet Jackson. And I
Right.
think because of it was unclear about who was to do what, there was some contestation over the will, if it was valid or not. It was an old will, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, his original will was dated back in 2002. And there was like issues with the authenticity of that. There wasn't anything in his estate plan, even though, as you mentioned, that his estate was worth over like $1 billion. He didn't put anything in his trust. Nothing was covered in his will. It wasn't authenticated. Uh, there's still a legal battle over the three executors that were named. The distributions have been delayed. It's a lot of stuff that is going on with his estate plan. It's completely insane. All of
Yeah,
the things that they're arguing about.
yeah, and all that does is, one, it delays the whole closing of the estate. Two, it becomes very expensive because the lawyers are fighting over the estate, and as we know, lawyers and litigation track up astronomical fees, and it's just a bad situation for everyone involved. And I think going back to when that was going on, there were disputes over his money, over I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he had that Sony music catalog collection that he owned a big
Yep.
stake in,
Yep.
and they were fighting over that.
Right.
All of these things probably could have been prevented had he had a clear will, clear executors, and be quite frank with you, if he would have updated it or at least had it reviewed every few years.
Hmm. Yeah. And it's even worse knowing how big his family is and the discussions with who gets what, communicating with all the family members to make sure that like everything is distributed evenly, especially with he has kids and then he has nieces and nephews and then his siblings. It's a whole like debacle over like all the beneficiaries and everybody who is okay with it, not okay with it. It's a constant like headache just
Yeah,
reading this.
good point. And that's why I tell a lot of our clients, you know this, that when they look to name executors of their estate, to one, do some name someone you trust. Not only that, name someone who's competent, someone who could do the job, and someone who doesn't have a conflict of interest, and then name an appropriate backup. That's very important, and be very clear about your executors and um, why you're naming them or who you're or who you're naming as executors. Otherwise, they're going to invite what we call a contestation. They're going to probably mismanage the estate. That's, and I tell some of our potential clients and our clients, just be very thoughtful and very judicious about who you're going to name to be your executor of your estate.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a ton of sense. So if by any random situation or circumstance, the King of Pop came to the Smith Law Firm and said, "Hey, I had a will back in 2002. There's not much here. I have over $1 billion of the estate plan. Start to finish, what would you kind of walk him through with doing to secure everything?"
Well, good question. There's a couple things we would do. We would do first. One, if he ever found the Smith Law Firm, which is highly dubious, but if he did, we would welcome him in open arms, of course. But we would try to at least elicit all the information we would need to properly advise him. We want to know the size of his estate. We want to know who his potential heirs are, um, who are his children, what does he want to accomplish with his estate plan. And we get all this information before we start advising him. And then, depending on what he wants, we may advise him that maybe a will is not the best thing to do. Maybe you need a more comprehensive estate plan, like a trust or something like that. You also need your healthcare directives and your power of attorneys and those types of things. So we first would determine whether that a will-based plan is best for him or a revocable living trust-based plan, because as you know, a living trust can provide a lot of protections that wills won't provide. Like for instance, had Michael had a living trust, then, and if it was done properly, of course, and if it was funded properly, then he wouldn't have had a probate estate, and there wouldn't be any challenges to his estate. So I mean, so that's one thing we would have probably done differently, is advise him about all of his options in the creative estate plan to mitigate any type of challenges to it, or any type of delayed distribution of his assets or delayed estate administration. So those are some of the things we would have done probably a little differently here at the Smith Law Firm.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, it for the King of Pop, of course, it would, take a while to get all of his assets and, any of his extra things that he has wrapped up in like Sony or, with his family. But for the like everyday, Iowan citizen, um, what would you suggest and how long do you think it would take to kind of, get everything situated, find out all their information, all their assets, family members, and just kind of, create an estate plan to just, be able to simplify everything.
Right. Good question, Courtney. One thing we would do is we'd sit down with him and do a very, very comprehensive initial intake interview. And then from there, we would try to ascertain his goals, one's goals, and creating their estate plan. Because there's certain things you could do, but we're going to find out what their end game is. What do they want to accomplish? And then from there, we'd recommend a plan of action. But even more importantly than that, we would reach out to them every 18 to 24 months to determine if anything's changed. Did you get divorced? Did you have any other children? Are you involved in any litigation? Did you acquire any more assets or major assets, or did you lose assets or transfer assets? Or would some type of long-term care planning be necessary? So every 18 to 24 months, we would try to get Michael in here and and maybe do a song for us. But in addition, let us know anything that's changed since the last time we met. So
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So with this being the king of pop, and with him not having an estate plan and kind of seeing how everything has panned out from worst case scenarios until like things that aren't really too bad. What would you suggest or say to regular citizens for getting them started in the estate plan? Because for me, I'm 29 and I've never even thought about an estate plan, and this is the king of pop who is his name is known everywhere. So what would you tell people, like, hey, you might want to start thinking about this now, or maybe you can wait a couple of years? What would you say?
yeah, good question. No, estate planning is for everyone. I don't care if you're like Mike and have $1 billion, or if you're like any Joe Schmo off the street and is single and has $100. Estate planning is important for everyone, especially if you have children. But even if you don't have children, here's why. Like say for instance, Courtney, you had to go maybe into a hospital or something, and you had to get some kind of medical treatment, and for whatever reason, you can't make that decision for yourself. Well, who's going to make that for you? And here's the problem: the medical providers, they're going to be hesitant to provide this, and maybe like an urgent medical treatment. They're going to be a little hesitant to provide it for you unless they know someone that can make a decision for you if you can't. And that could be easily accomplished by a healthcare directive, something like that. So, estate plan is important for people like Michael Jackson, of course, but just as important for someone like you who maybe not have the 500 million. I mean, you could. I don't know if you're doing that, but
I wish I did.
I would imagine if you're working for Smith Law Firm, you probably don't. But no, seriously, even if, it doesn't matter. You could be every Joe Schmo off the street. You need an estate plan. It saves you a lot of time, and headache, and heartache down the road. So, yeah, good question, though.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I mean, it's not something that everybody thinks about, especially for like college students. They're not thinking about an estate plan. Even those who are 30 and up, we're not necessarily thinking about the estate plan. So it makes sense to kind of relate it back and say, anybody can have one. It's a lifelong thing. It constantly needs to be updated, and you don't want to end up like a lot of these celebrities who have the life that they set out to have, and then they don't have an estate plan, and then their family is 20 plus years later still having to work through their estate to make sure that everybody's taken care of.
Right. And not only are they dealing with the grief of losing a loved one, then that grief could suddenly turn to anger if you're arguing with other loved ones in the family over money or who's going to care for a child. Like, say Michael would have passed away with minor children, or someone, not even Michael, anybody passed away with minor children without an estate plan in place. Well, who's going to take care of your kids? And guess what? If you don't have a plan in place, the court, anybody can petition the court to raise your kids. So that's why we say it's so very important, even if you don't have $1 million, like we don't, of course, to have some type of plan in place. Even if you don't have children or nor $1 million, you got to get one of these plans in place because you never know when you're going to need it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So walking through like an actual estate plan, there was this TikTok video that I saw with these two women. Their mom had recently passed away, and to kind of make the grieving process, a lot better for the both of them, they recorded this video and they posted on TikTok of like a letter to my mom. Sorry about all the things that I didn't know you're supposed to take care of. And they were kind of listing a bunch of different things. Like I think one of them mentioned that they didn't know you were supposed to like cancel some kind of like car registration thing. So they got a bill for her, like, hey, you owe this amount of money. And it's like, hey, my mom's been, gone for like a year. She doesn't drive? Why would she need to drive? So I don't know what to do with this bill. So what would you say in regards to like estate planning would be like, hey, these are all the things estate planning takes care of so that it relates to, everyday people so they know, oh yeah, I do need the estate plan because I have pets or like I do need one because I go to school and I have a car. So what does estate planning really take care of that would make people think I do need this, even though I'm only 21 and I have a dog?
Well, a good point. A lot of people, have pets and they value their pets. They love their pets. I mean, I have a pet, you have a pet. Well, we don't think about if something happens to us, what's going to happen to our pets? Do we want them to be cared for? Yes. How do we want them to be cared for? Is there money to care for them? And who's going to care for them? Your car, you mentioned the ladies on TikTok, what about their car? Well, who's going to notify the Department of Transportation that the person's deceased so they don't keep getting billed? Or more importantly, who's going to notify them on their insurance company that they're no longer alive, so therefore they need to cancel something or make sure some insurance doesn't get canceled until something's wound up to prevent liability. So these are all the things a good estate planning lawyer will advise you on when creating your estate plan, what to do in these scenarios. Another big issue I see is some people have, for whatever reason, have certain desires when it comes to what to do with their own remains when they pass away, whether someone wants to be cremated or someone wants to be buried or someone, who knows, they want to be stored in a genie bottle. I don't know. But these are type of things that you could pre-plan for um, with the proper advice from an attorney. Also, a good estate planning attorney will advise you on how to care for or pay for um, death after death, types of things like funeral expenses, burial expenses, the time from between when one passes and the time when either an estate is opened up or a trustee can administer a trust. How you want to cover that period financially, what to do in that
Right.
scenario. So these are all types of things um, that needs to be talked about with your attorney and put into a plan, an appropriate plan going forward. So, I mean, it's interesting, but unfortunately, it's interesting from from a negative standpoint, for people like Michael Jackson's estate and family and Prince. But from a legal standpoint, looking at it and knowing what you can do to prevent these scenarios makes it interesting. So.
Yeah. And then that's why we are starting this whole podcast and this segment to begin with, to talk about celebrities and, even relating them to everyday people to say, hey, this is the king of pop. And he still didn't have an estate plan, even being worth over $1 billion, and this is how his entire family is still dealing with this. So if it could happen to him, it could happen to everyday people.
Right, right. And keep in mind, because he had so much assets, and I understand he had a lot of debt too. But the more assets you have, more people are going to challenge it. Because let's be real, when it comes to money in this country, people are going to come after it. So that's why it's so very important to have clear documents, estate planning documents in place, have clear what we call fiduciaries or executors, trustees who you trust and are competent to do these types of things. So,
Right. Yep. And that is all extremely good advice and very helpful to, people from 18 to 80 who are, looking at their pets or even, their family members and kids to say, I want to make sure everybody's taken care of.
yeah.
So wrapping up today's episode, then, what advice would you offer to listeners who are looking at the King of Pop or, any celebrities that are having difficulties with their estate planning and kind of relating it to themselves? What advice would you give to them to, kind of get the ball rolling with their estate planning?
Reach out to your local attorney if you're here in Iowa or even if you're in Minnesota. We definitely can help you out. But reach out to a local attorney. Just get a consult. Start the process. Just start the process, and then it'll go from there. So to speak.
Beautiful. Well, that, sounds doable and feasible for, anybody to just take that first step. So thank you very much, Sean, for shedding light on Michael
Yeah.
Jackson's estate planning journey. Valuable lessons, really good insight for the everyday listener. So, and to anybody who's tuned in to our very first podcast episode, thank you very much. This has been Estate Planning Nightmares Unmasked. So we do want to, remind everybody who's listening, estate planning does not have to be a nightmare. You do not have to end up like the King of Pop or even Prince, as we mentioned in the podcast. But here on the Smith Law Firm podcast, we want to be able to guide you through all the celebrity mishaps to ease your worries, make it relatable, and make sure that you guys know that, estate planning does not have to be a nightmare. It can be a breeze. So until next time, to our, next episode, please stay informed on all things estate planning, stay empowered, and safeguard your legacy. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, Courtney, thanks. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.